Hey, what's up, everybody? It's I'm Safdar, and you are listening to the Cognitive.fm podcast. I'm excited and thrilled to host this show for you. This is episode number 8 of Cognitive.fm podcast. Today is April the 6th and 2021, and in this episode, we dive into what this new wave is in Cognitive ecosystem, and this wave is GitOps with my guest Steve Buchanan. This is how Steve defined GitOps. GitOps is an operating model pattern for cloud-native applications, storing application and declarative infrastructure as code in Git as the source of truth used for automated continuous delivery. Let me introduce my guest. Steve lives in Minnesota. He has been in information technology for 20 plus years. His interest in computers started in his senior year of high school when he landed a position building computer servers and working on networking for a small computer company. Today, he was a director, cloud transformation, container services lead with a one-day Accenture. Author of Pluralsight author and a 9-time Microsoft MVP. He considers himself a technology journalist who enjoys architecting solutions that solve business problems. Recently, he has been focusing on transforming businesses through technology. He has presented at technical conferences including Microsoft Ignite, O'Reilly Open Source Convention, Bitcoin, Expert Live Europe, and Midwest Management Summit. On his blog site, bookatech.com, you will find his thoughts, ideas, and tips about technology. In his current role, he worked mainly with Microsoft products and Microsoft technologies. He worked most of the time with Azure Stack, Log Analytics, PowerShell, ARM, Azure Automation, DSC, Azure DevOps, the entire system stack, Service Manager, Data Protection Manager, Configuration Manager, Operation Manager, Orchestrator, Virtual Machine Manager, IaaS, Hyper-V, and SharePoint. He also worked with many open source technologies such as Linux, containers, Kubernetes, Apache, Drupal, WordPress, MySQL, Terraform, and Python. On his blog site, you will find a mix of posts around open source and Microsoft technology. So want to see what he is up to? Follow him on Twitter at Buchatech, Buchatech. And let's go ahead and say hi to Steve Buchanan, aka Buchatech, and cut it over to the interview.
Shutterstock Music. Shutterstock Music. Shutterstock Music.
So thank you everyone for joining us today. And today we're talking about this new wave that you already heard about it. We started from Docker, get into the Kubernetes, and now we are talking about everywhere what this new wave is. And this new wave is what we call as a GitOps. And everybody is talking about what it is and how it's different for infrastructure as code and other services. And I find a guest will explain this all this in more, and he has a course for you, a dedicated course for you on this topic, Introduction to GitOps on Pluralsight. And he's also a Microsoft MVP, and he is a member of, also a part of bigger consultancy in the world. And his name is Steve Buchanan. How are you, Steve Buchanan, and where you live right now?
Good. Hey, thanks for me on. So, yeah, I'm based out of the United States, and I'm actually based out of Minnesota, so up north. So, thanks for having me on.
Thank you very much for sharing your time with me today. And because the first question I'm everybody asking in my podcast is how you get introduced to this cloud native Kubernetes and Docker thing. Because we all know we are right now in industrial revolution 4.0 or 2.0 people like to call, and how you introduced to this industrial revolution, and how you introduce even Kubernetes and GitOps and Docker things.
Yeah, so that's a great question, right? So, as soon as I seen the wave coming of cloud and cloud native and DevOps, I started to gravitate to those areas, even on my own, even before I started working on those things at work. Um, and even if a company, your company that you're working for, maybe they're not supporting you to move into new area, or maybe they're not leveraging those new technologies yet, it doesn't have to stop you, right? You can always spin up labs, you can buy books, you can join, like Pluralsight or cloudskills.io, and you can start learning about these new technologies and new methodologies, because at some point your organization is going to adopt the new technologies. They might be a bit behind, but it doesn't mean you have to be, right? And then when your organization gets there and they're ready to adopt those technologies, you can be one of the people in the forefront. You can be on that cutting edge and helping your organization get there. And so just really invest in yourself. And that's really what I did, right? I had a position where, I wanted to move away from System Center. And I know that sounds crazy because I was a System Center guy for a long time, right? But I saw the writing on the wall, and Microsoft had been nudging all of us for a while. But I saw the writing on the wall, like, cloud is where it's at. Even with your management stuff, cloud's where it's at. DevOps is where it's at. Docker, with the container stuff, and then Kubernetes. And I started to move there on my own, even though the organization I was working for at the time didn't support me in that firsthand. I just started doing it. Also, in regards to cloud, I actually started work with cloud back in, I think it was 2008. I jumped right in on AWS, started working with EC2 instances, and just kind of in there playing around, and had some workloads running in there, right? So tried it out. We ran it for a while and ran some production stuff in there, but then we moved away from AWS to another smaller cloud provider at the time, who was a startup. But yeah, 2008, I jumped in there. Microsoft came out with Azure. I looked at it. I kept my eyes on it. Would go into Azure, with free accounts or whatever, try it out here and there. And then when Microsoft moved to Azure Resource Manager, that's when I knew, okay, they're taking this serious and they're really making, leaps and bounds with this. And that's when I personally started to take Azure serious as well, and jumped in and really dove into Azure Stack. But during that period of when I was testing the waters with Azure and had tested the waters with AWS, I was doing a lot of private cloud, on-prem cloud type stuff, with System Center and with other technologies. So I was moving there right away. And then when PowerShell came out, I was doing anything I could, or finding any reason I could to, do stuff in PowerShell. So, all that stuff helps, and it builds on itself. And, over time you build up the skill set, and you just have to keep moving forward. And that's what I did. And that's what I always do. And so when I saw Kubernetes was a thing, I just started moving towards that as well. And the beautiful thing is that, Microsoft embraces all these open source technologies on the Azure platform. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds, where you can still do Microsoft stuff and do open source stuff. Because I've always had a desire to work more and more with open source.
Yes, definitely. It's a very good story for me because a lot of the people asking about will love this Docker and Kubernetes, but my organization don't want me to invest this time on this particular technology. We're using, let's say, we're using other technologies in their class, in their stack. But what you said,
Mm.
open to books, you are open to Pluralsight, cloud skills, and other platforms that providing skills that you that is everybody want to learn in 2021. And if you want to be successful in your careers, it's a very interesting story from me. And on the topic of
Another thing I'll add there too, like if you really want to help an organization move towards these newer technologies, remember like things that are important to organizations are like the bottom line, the numbers, what are the business cases, what are the use cases, is it going to, reduce spend in an area, like is it going to enhance the business, is it going to give a competitive edge? So we all need to be thinking about that too, not just about the technology and like, oh, is it cool? Yeah, it's cool. We all love technology. That's why we're in the field. But how can it be useful to the business, right? So when you look at Kubernetes and you look at containers and even anything cloud native, compare that to what your organization is doing today and find out where those gaps are today, maybe with on-premises or, IaaS stuff that they might be doing. Find out where those use cases are. Find out where Kubernetes is going to bring that real value to the business. Maybe your company's planning to adopt some new applications and they'll run better on Kubernetes, right? Or as containers, or maybe they ship their software as containers, right? Find that business case and that value and bring that to the table as well. And you'll see a lot of leaders will open up if you start speaking their language, right? And I think as technologists, oftentimes that's the piece that we forget. We have to be able to speak the language of the business as well, not just the tech.
Yeah, yes, definitely. That's a great advice. It's a great pro tip for everyone listening to us. Understand what your company is currently good at and bad at, and where it's bad at, and look at the solutions that are good fit for your scenario. Test those out. Prepare some demo. Show to the CEO. Show the project lead of your team, and then you ask them, "This is how it's different from our current stack, and how much money you can save in future when we implement those in our current stack." That's a great pro tip for.
Exactly.
That's a great pro tip that.
Exactly.
And on the topic of Kubernetes and all these kind of things, everybody asking me how Azure is fit these Kubernetes and container stuff into its own, and where to look we see how could we implement Kubernetes in Azure, what are the tool set, and what are the mind shift we want to change, because container and Kubernetes is all about mind shift as a technology shift as well. So can you elaborate in this point how Azure fit into the cloud native stack?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, first and foremost, like Kubernetes is not the answer to everything, right? If you have a problem or you have a need, like it doesn't mean that Kubernetes is like the answer to it, right? Also on Azure, there's a lot of services that allow you to run containers on Azure Cloud. And so if you have a need, the answer may not be, hey, let's just stick it on AKS, right? Azure Kubernetes service. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second here. But maybe you can run that container on one of the other many services that run container in Azure. So I don't know if most people know this, but you can actually run custom containers on Azure Functions. You can run containers on Azure App Service. You can also, like if you have one or two containers, like just a couple of containers, you can run them on something called Azure Container Instances as well. And with those services, and there's more ways you can run containers on Azure as well, but with those services, let's take like ACI for example. If you run it there, there's no overhead for you, right? So you're running a container on a PaaS service. And so you reduce that complexity, where if you jump right to Kubernetes, you have to understand the complexities that come with it. And the complexities doesn't take away from the value. You just need to understand what you're getting into, right? Like you can go buy a Ferrari, but if you buy a Ferrari, you better know how to work that launch control, right? Or you can go buy you could buy a BMW. You're probably going to hop in it and you're going to know how to drive. And so it just depends on what you need and where you need to get to and how fast you need to get to it. But there's many options on Azure to run your containers. Now, Azure Kubernetes service is a great option for running containers on Azure. I call it a semi-managed Kubernetes service, because Microsoft, they manage the plane nodes for you, right? So, but you still have to do some management and some, watching of the worker nodes. And so there are things that still fall on your plate as your responsibility. Now, with Kubernetes, you have other things you need to think about. Well, with Azure Kubernetes services, other things you need to think about too. Like, yeah, you can spin it up. You could do a line of Terraform code and have a AKS cluster like run in no time, right? How are you going to do the networking? How are you going to get traffic into your Kubernetes cluster, right? How are you going to do DR across regions if you need to do that? What do your pipelines look like to actually get your application onto that cluster? What's your security look like? Your access into that environment, right? Like, so there's all these different things you need to think about that come along with Kubernetes. It's a hot buzzword, and yeah, it's great technology, but you need to think about those other things, and you need to put some planning into it before you just dive into it, right? Even though it's on cloud.
Yes, definitely. I think if you rewind the clock back when the virtual machines came into being, there is so much going on in the ecosystem. There's so many Linux flavors coming up in the
Right.
market. We have images of Linux machines coming up in the market. We have some storage solution that back into that VM. Then we have networking capabilities. There's a whole lot of discussion moving on. And then we see the cloud
Right.
is taking over the world, because at the end of the day, its cloud is managing the VM or some machines on behalf of you. But you have to
Right.
learn the shared responsibility model, that some
Yes.
manages, manages by Azure and something manages by you. It's not about you or get rid of anything. It's about the shared responsibility model when using the cloud like Azure or AWS or GCP or any other cloud. And now when we
Spot on.
Yes, and when we move into the container world, there is so much going on right now, because container security is a hot topic right now. Container storage is a hot topic right now. Kubernetes is a hot topic right now. So there is so much going on. And if you doesn't understand those kind of thing, and then we move to the Azure Kubernetes service, and you came up with something broken on behalf of when you were using it or deploying it to the production, where are you gonna go and find that solution to that problem? That is a bigger pain that people had.
Yeah, spot on. And you bring up some good things like that container security, the image security. You should have your own private repository to host your containers and or Helm charts if you're using Helm charts. And by the way, Helm charts is another thing you need to learn if you're going to be using Kubernetes, right? And you have to secure all these things, right? So you have to secure the actual images, and by the way, they have to be updated, because if there's new OS, there's security for those OSs that are on the containers, container images. You got to patch that stuff, and then you got to push that back up to your registry. You have policies for that stuff, and security. So there's a whole world of things, like entire ecosystem that comes along with Kubernetes. And it's important to understand that, like the whole picture. and have a plan.
Yes, definitely. Because I think if you move to the Kubernetes side, there's two things. One is called the control plane, and one is called the nodes in that control plane manages the node for you. So control plane is hidden away from you in the in Azure Kubernetes service.
Right.
You still manages the nodes where the your workload is running at it, and you have to back into what this security aspect of it. You can also collect the logs out of it, metrics out of it, and you learn so many things. And now with the evolution of container and Kubernetes, you learn Linux. And you if
Right.
past you doesn't able to understand what the Linux is, but now it is your job and primary responsibility to learn Linux.
Yeah, that's a good point. And like, so early on in my career, even when I was going to school, there was a huge focus on Microsoft. Microsoft was so big, right? And that's where the jobs were. But I dove right into Linux and got my Linux Plus, and I dabbled in Linux throughout the years. But we've seen this huge shift from just Microsoft, like Windows Server, right, to Linux. Like for the past like 2 years, I've done way more Linux than I've done any Microsoft. And I'm living in the shell, living in command line, like just writing code and doing most of the stuff that I do from there. Right. So it's interesting. It's a different shift. It's a different like mind shift and mindset that you have to get into and mode. And it's interesting. And being a Microsoft guy for so many years and being used to like Windows Server and doing a lot of things, most of the things I would do in the GUI, and switching to like primarily command line, it's a different shift and a different dynamic, but I like it. Most days I don't want to go back to working on servers, and if I can avoid that, I do.
Yes, definitely. When I started my career as a techie, so I always been the Windows guy, never used Linux. And then I love the containers and Kubernetes, but I really reluctant to learn Linux. So I need to know that Linux is the foundation for you to be an expert
Yeah.
in Kubernetes and Docker. And then I really shifted my mindset. Go learn Linux first and then shift to the Docker Kubernetes things because it depends on it, because containers are essentially the Linux. The Linux is the foundation that bring us this power of technology of Linux. We have Windows container, but they are very bloated inside. And right now they have Microsoft putting so many effort in so they can minimize their size, and we don't need a lot of effort in putting that effort. But Linux is the technology for you to learn in 2021 if you want to be comfortable
Right.
in Docker and Kubernetes.
Right.
So now we talk about Docker, Kubernetes, all things. So this is the topic that we are focusing on today. What is GitOps and why you see it's this new wave is everywhere in the tech world, in Azure, in clouds, in everywhere, in every conference we are talking about GitOps, how to build GitOps enable infrastructure in Azure, on AWS, or wherever. So can you elaborate what is GitOps and how it shifted our focus to traditional CI/CD system?
Yeah, so GitOps is actually, think of it as an operating model, right? And think of it as the CD in CI/CD. So think of it as assisting you with your continuous deployment. And it's an operating model for cloud native applications and cloud native environments. So a lot of people associate it with just Kubernetes, and that's just, it goes beyond that. Now, most of the GitOps operators, and I'll talk about what those are available or were built and designed for Kubernetes, right? So they work really well with Kubernetes. But there are some operators out there that work with just Terraform. So you could use them for your cloud native environment and have the same kind of principles and best practices and operating model that you have in your Kubernetes environments. Now, GitOps was term coined by Weaveworks in, I think it was 2017. So it's been around for a while, and they were actually, using GitOps to manage their Kubernetes environments. And they created a blog post, and people started to pick up on it, and it was really good operating model. Now today, there's a GitOps working group where this group is defining like what it is and best practices and just defining GitOps as a whole. And that is a part of the CNCF, and I'm excited to see things out of that GitOps work. Participate in some of those meetings and try to get input and feedback as well. GitOps is management for a while. If you think about things like Ansible, if you think about things like Chef and Puppet, we've been doing configuration management, even desired state configuration on the Microsoft side. We've been doing configuration management, and we've been focused on desired state with servers. So we've been doing that for a while. It's like, okay, you can take and write some Chef or some Puppet and apply that to your servers or desired state configuration and get that desired state that you want to have in your environment to fight off like configuration drift and things like that. Now, the difference with GitOps is it takes Git and makes that the source of truth. And so the things that you put in Git become your desired state. And then there's something called GitOps operators, and those are software agents, and those look at what you have in Git and will enforce those things, or AKA make it happen in your environment. Now, again, most of the GitOps operators were designed with Kubernetes in mind, so they work for Kubernetes, right? And so a lot of people assume that it's just focused on Kubernetes. But yeah, so the GitOps operators, when you deploy those, they deploy as pods and they run as pods on a Kubernetes cluster. And so you give those permission to your Kubernetes cluster, right? You can give it permission at the Kubernetes cluster level. You can give it permission at a namespace level. And so there's different things you can do with that. And there's just a lot that goes into it. But in a nutshell, GitOps is an operating model that takes Git as the source of truth. That's where you put your desired state, right? So you put your YAML files in there for your Kubernetes cluster, right? And or your Helm charts. And then this GitOps operator will monitor that, look for anything new or changes, and then it will make those things happen in your actual Kubernetes clusters. And so it's giving you that desired state. It's giving you things like, audit capabilities, because everything you do is in Git. So you're doing things through, you're making changes and updates through commits, right? So you inherently have an audit trail there. And so it's just, think of GitOps also as an extension of DevOps. It's like taking, a lot of the lessons we've learned there and extending it into a new operating model with some existing concepts, applying that to Kubernetes environments and cloud native, and just kind of taking it to the next step. So I'm excited to see where GitOps goes and tools that'll come out in the future to just make it better and better and better. I'm really excited about it.
Yes, definitely. I think from the configuration management side, we have a tool guide to Terraform and Ansible. They have this approach of pulling the configuration from the server and look at the server state, desired state, and matches the actual state with the desired state. Then we have a GitHub. GitHub is so popular. We manage anything in GitHub. And then we see Kubernetes is at the end of the day, all the configuration file. Like with pod, we have a YAML for a pod, YAML for the deployment, YAML
Right.
for service, YAML for the ingress, YAML for everything. At the end of the day, everything is YAML. and we deploy it. Why not we can make that as a version control? We push that YAML file into the GitHub, so everything. But the last piece of the puzzle is still remains, who watches the GitHub for these YAML file. And then we see a Weaveworks came up with a solution called GitOps, and they are
Right.
actually doing the same, watching the YAML file in the GitHub repo, matches that with the desired state, and comparing that to whether our actual state is desired state is different from desired state, and these are all the capabilities of GitOps. But the first question came up in my mind: why GitOps is now, not before?
Why is it now and not before? I think there was just a group of smart people at Weaveworks that had to manage Kubernetes environments. And if you've ever had to do that, it's complex and it can be a pain in the butt. And so they figured, hey, we're doing all this stuff in YAML. Let's just make it easier. And let's come up with a concept that'll give us a way to head off like configuration drift, and let's make it easier for our developers too, right? So GitHub, you mentioned, is widely used. I think they're up to 50 million users or something like past that. Or maybe it's 50 million repositories, but a lot of people use it. And so a lot of people know Git and a lot of people understand Git. And so GitOps abstracts away a lot of the complexity of Kubernetes and brings it to a tool that people are already using and has wide adoption, right? But you don't lose the power of Kubernetes. It's just making it easier by abstracting that away. And I think Weaveworks saw all of these things and kind of brought it together and came up with something great and then released it to the public. That's the great thing about like open source and this culture of sharing, is when companies do stuff like that, we all benefit, right? And Weaveworks also created a GitOps operator called Flux. And Flux, they open source that too. So, anyone can grab that and start using it and start learning about Flux. And, you don't have to pay for that. So it's great. So there's, the top GitOps operators are Flux as well as Argo CD. So I'd highly recommend, picking those up and checking those out. But we're starting to see more tools pop up in that GitOps ecosystem. We're starting to see like another tool is called Atlantis. And Atlantis is an open source project. And what it does is it takes those same GitOps concepts, but it's focused on Terraform. And so you can have your Terraform scripts in a Git repository, and this Atlantis will monitor for changes and stuff, and it'll go ahead and, it'll run the Terraform apply for you, right? Now, there's more to it than that. You got to go look at the tool and read the documentation and whatnot, but it's bringing those same principles of GitOps. But think about that, right? Now you can use GitOps for your cloud native environment. And you're not just focused on Kubernetes at that point, right? If you're running a bunch of PaaS, if you're running IaaS servers, if you're running, right, you can use GitOps in that context. In fact, Terraform has providers for all these different systems, right? If you're doing, let's say your organization has VMware on premises, they haven't gone full-blown cloud yet, and you want to start to ramp up on your DevOps and GitOps skills, you could grab something like Atlantis and start working with it, right? You could do that in a lab environment. And so as far as why we haven't seen GitOps until now, Weaveworks did blog about it in 2017. So it's been out there for a while. It takes a while for things to catch on. And it just, it takes a while of operating environments. And so Kubernetes has been around for a while, but not that long. And so I think it was just born out of, Weaveworks finding a way to do it better with Kubernetes and managing their Kubernetes environments.
And on the topic of GitOps, and we also see that Weavework is also deployed a model with how the GitOps actually look like in practice. They did out a blog post for that. So when I see right now, when we operate that in the GitOps world, we have three repositories. One that is configuring the CI/CD pipeline and build the infrastructure for you, another for the configuration one, and the third repository that watches the configuration and how its drift is changing from that. And now, without GitOps, you were managing the one repo, and with GitOps, you're managing I think three repos, what they currently suggest. So is and people are asking now we are managing the complexity and bringing the complexity back. Can you elaborate this point on a more?
Yeah, so I think, with GitOps, it's not perfect, right? And it's still a relatively new operating model. And so that's why the open source community created this GitOps working group. And so, with that working group, some of these complexities that you're talking about are topics for that working group. And you have a lot of smart people in that working group that are using GitOps. And so the feedback will come back into that working group, and that working group and the community at large will find better ways of doing things, right? And so you mentioned one way of kind of handling or using GitOps and using three repositories. It doesn't mean it has to be done that way. There are ways where you can condense it back down to one repository, right? Um, it just depends on what works for your organization, how many environments you have, right? Some organizations might have a dev, a stage in production. Other organizations might just have a dev and prod, or if you're really crazy, you might just have a prod environment, right? And so the point I'm trying to make there is that organizations are different. And so the way that they're going to use GitOps is going to be different. Just like the way that Weaveworks uses GitOps is their way. And you'll find other organizations, as they start adopting GitOps and using it, they're going to find ways to maybe do it better, right? Also, there's different tools. And sometimes the way that you're working with GitOps might be a limitation of the tool, right? You might be making up for a limitation of the tool in the way that you've configured your GitOps. And so I'm a pretty big fan of Argo CD, and Argo CD was actually developed by Intuit. I don't know if a lot of folks know that, but it was developed by Intuit, and they decided to open source that. And there's some interesting concepts inside of Argo CD where you actually have like applications, or you actually have projects, and then you have applications inside of the projects. And so the applications are tied to Git repository. And so there's some things that you can do where you can say, okay, I have an application, an actual application, and this is my project. And then I'm going to have my different environments inside of my project, like my dev and my stage and my prod. And then I'm going to determine how I'm going to sync those or what I'm going to do with those. And Argo CD is able to work with something called Customize. And Customize is another Kubernetes tool and does a good job of helping you handle, different environments and having specific environment like configurations out of one repository, right? So now we can use Argo CD with GitOps and still have the power of GitOps, combine that with something like Customize, and we can bring it back down to one repository, right? But you'll have to learn Customize and understand how that works. And Customize has been around for a while, right? Teams have been using it, and it's not a bad thing. It's just something you need to learn and bring into your GitOps, your specific GitOps model. And so there's no one answer that fits all, right?
Yeah.
So hopefully hopefully that answered the question.
Yes,
That was a
definitely.
long.
No, no, that's great. Great discussion. It's totally because I actually when I implemented that, I think that's a GitOps is a great tools, great approach, great mindset shift. But now I'm managing the three repository. But what you kind of elaborate this point is not to be always all the time. You can do it to condense that to the single repository, and then it's going to be all the magic happening inside the one repository is watching all the changes and pulling down the images, because the tool that is brought up, that's called customize, it's a great tool because you are managing the configuration, because in the containers world images are changing all the time. So where
Right.
you put that configuration, like Nginx 1.2, Nginx 2.3, Nginx 4.1. So customized,
Right.
it's pop out these setting for versioning control and centralize those in some way, some configuration, and then you're watching the changes. Now my images has new image come up that's called 2.1. Now grab that up because now your actual status is drifted from desired state. So Customize is a great tool. I think everybody who's listening to us, go check that out. I think many of the people are already using that because of this excellent dynamic configuration you can put in with Customize.
Exactly. Exactly. And you know what? For those that might not be familiar with Customize, it's been around for a while. There is wide adoption of it. In fact, it's so wide that it's baked right into kube control, right? So it's actually it's actually baked into Kubernetes. So when you deploy Kubernetes, Customize is available to you. And so it's just something, you should, if you want to get down to one repository and you want to leverage the power of GitOps and you want to have, and you have like multiple environments, give Customize a try. And that'll, so it just, there are options, right? There are options.
Yes, yes, definitely. Because right now we have in a GitOps world, there is so many options available and so many coming out every day. And in the open source world, you can't do, because in the previous day, like 2000 in 1990s, we have some limited option, but now we have all the crazy peoples all around the world, and they not give you this word. You can't do it. You can do it because they have a good community support as well, and they put out every great effort into it. And you right now, I think, if we say today, no, it's not possible. But when we wake up tomorrow, no, it's possible because of the
Right.
great community support we have.
Yeah, and that's, the speed of cloud and the speed of Kubernetes and containers and the speed of just open source and just the speed of technology. It's accelerating and just making everything go faster.
Yes. And one of the last question from is in the GitOps topic. We see these two operators, one called Flux and one called Argo CD. I think in the Argo CD, you don't have the privilege to rebuild the images. But in the Flux CD, you can rebuild the images. What the Argo arguments is in this where they ask about that we don't want to rebuild images because the GitOps model approach is to look for the repository and look the changes they have. We are not making the changes. Changes are making by somebody else, and we are watching that. But Flux has this capability to rebuild the image again, integrated with GitOps as well. So, what your argument on this point?
Yeah, so I haven't actually dove into that specific, but my answer there would be, it's different for different organizations, right? And so, and also you have two different groups of people that built GitOps operators, and so they have different areas of functionality. And so that's the beauty of it is if, you need to rebuild images, use Flux. If you don't, Argo CD is your answer, right? And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that question or what you want to do there. Like, keep in mind that GitOps is an operating model and the GitOps operators are tools. Just like cloud is cloud is it's not a place, it's a way of doing things, right? because you can actually start to do heavy automation and have private clouds or hybrid clouds on-prem. And so, but you have Azure, you have AWS, and you have GCP. And if you go to those different clouds, even if you're working with the same technologies, you're going to find differences, right? You could use the Kubernetes managed service across any of those three, and you're going to find slight differences. And you're going to find things that you like about Azure. You're going to find things that you'll like better about GCP. Like with GCP, there's a marketplace where you can just pull down, Helm charts or applications already and pull them right down. Like they're doing some pretty innovative stuff, right? With GCP's managed Kubernetes service. But over on Azure, they're doing some great stuff too. And so it's the same kind of concept with these GitOps operators. Keep in mind, GitOps is the operating model. The GitOps operators are software. They're a tool. And so you find the tool that fits your need.
Yes, definitely. Having two options, I think, might be figure out what's fit in your current stack. Might be you're using the tool that don't need to rebuild images, but in some environment,
Right.
need some kind of capability to rebuild the images and then applies those changes back. Now you have the option that we
Right.
already talk about in the open source community. You have so many options to do so many kind of things, and it's opened a lot of door of doing things in a different way, in an awesome way, in a cool way. And
Right.
for the last few questions, what do you think right now is missing in the GitOps and it's going up in the future may come up, or what do you think it's a learning game? What is learning game is look like in the GitOps world, and how we do figure out where to go and find resources and learn all those kind of stuff in the GitOps world?
Yeah, so I'll take the first question first. So what do I think is missing in the GitOps world? So GitOps is still relatively new as far as adoption. I think what's missing is there's this misconception that it's solely focused on Kubernetes. And so I think what's missing is an ecosystem of tools, aka GitOps operators, for cloud native, right? I mentioned one called Atlantis. There's another one called KubeStack that's really good. But again, KubeStack it works with cloud native, but it has a kind of a focal point on Kubernetes. So we need more GitOps operators, kind of like Atlantis, that focus on the cloud estate, like your cloud native environments and running your applications in cloud native. We need more of that. And I think that's what's missing, right? And I think we'll see that come as the adoption of GitOps grows. We'll see more and more of those kind of tools, come to bear and come to the market. For the second question, where can you go to learn more about GitOps? Well, shameless plug here. I have a course in Pluralsight. It's called GitOps, the Big Picture. And it's a great course to get you started, talk about a lot of the things we talked about today, but we go in deeper. I have some demos on there of using Argo CD with AKS. Also have some demos in there of using Azure Arc with Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes, with GitOps using the Flux operator to manage a GKE cluster over on GCP. So some pretty cool and wild stuff that Microsoft is doing, right, with Azure Arc and being able to manage Kubernetes cluster over on GCP, from Azure and using GitOps. Some pretty cool stuff. And I'm really excited about what's coming in the future because of all these technologies that we have. So the Pluralsight course, go check that out. Also, there are some GitOps books coming out. I don't know the authors. I did look at the content. The content looks really good. You can check out my blog, bucatech.com. When those books release, I'll probably blog about them. I'll pick up those books and check them out. I might even do some book reviews. And then the GitOps working group is keep an eye on that. If you feel like you want to participate. And then Weaveworks, their blog. they have a really awesome blog where they're always putting out content around GitOps. So, and for another area is like keep watching your channel.
Thank you very much.
I have my gut feeling is that you're going to have more content on GitOps in the future. So
Yes, definitely, definitely. As the going off, might be we have session on just Argo CD, have a session on just Flux, also have a session on how to manage GitOps in AKS and how Azure Arc is enable the GitOps architecture as well. There is all so much planning going on. But what you asked, what you told about today, the GitOps a big picture, and all the resources are available for you if you're watching that from YouTube channel. You can grab the link from show note that's available. That's a show note in here in YouTube. Grab that. I also watched the full course of Steve Buchanan on Pure Side in GitOps big picture. I think it gives you the whole 365-degree view of what you can do with GitOps on different aspect of it. You can it has a section on how to manage it on the Argo CD, how to do it on an AKS, what is Azure Arc. So in a 1.5 hour, you learn so many cool stuff. I'm also expecting the GitOps deeper dive content as well from Steve, and hopefully it's going to be available. I think you can check out any day Plura site and give a feedback and monitor that what's new coming out. I hopefully we can see the GitOps deep dive content from Steve as well.
yeah, definitely go on Pluralsight, follow my profile on there. I do have future plans around Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes. There's going to be some GitOps stuff in there for sure. Also have some plans around some Argo CD stuff. So definitely follow me on Pluralsight. Follow me on Twitter as well. So at Bucatech. And then my blog is bucatech.com. I haven't been blogging recently, but I do plan to pick that up. And I'm going to be doing some blogging around, like AKS and some Argo CD and maybe even some Flux and some GitOps. So definitely keep an eye out for what I'll be doing in the future.
Yeah, and also I think GitOps Con is also is in the plan this year. Do we see
What was that?
GitOps Con? I see.
Oh yeah, I think so.
Talking about the GitOps Con. Can we see you there as well? Are you going there?
Oh, at the GitOps conference?
Yes.
I'm not sure yet, but if I'm not there, check it out anyway. I'm sure it's going to be a great conference. I'll either be I may submit a session for GitOps Con, or if not, I'll be attending and just checking out the sessions. So either way, check it out for sure.
Yes, definitely. Because right now we are virtual and we can join from everywhere and meet people like Steve and other people around the world that have some passion around learning new things and sharing with us that knowledge and how this knowledge help us, our company in their current stack, and how we can be effective in reducing the cost our company capitalist on learning new technology, adopting new technologies, adopting new framework. So can you wrap up all the discussion and some school tips you want to share with our listener about their tech career? Some last few words from you.
Yeah, what I'll say is just keep an eye on GitOps, keep an eye on, the stuff that's happening like containers and Kubernetes and cloud. If your company's not working on that right now, don't worry, just jump in there yourself, grab some books, grab some labs, free blogs out there, tutorials, get some trial accounts on, these cloud providers and start moving towards it yourself. And eventually, you'll have the skills where you'll be able to, take on those roles and help your company move towards those technologies, or you might have to move to another company and you'll be able to work in the area that you want to work in. So, but there's no shortage of the need for tech people. It's growing all the time on a global scale. And so it's a great space to be in.
Yes, definitely. So pro tip for me, for everyone who listening to us, is go check that out. The books, the blogs, and the podcast session, the live stream, what is going on. So you can be familiar with the language of the technology that our people are using in globally, and then you figure out the place or the free time for you to implement those in your current stack, and then share with your colleagues and project lead that this current stack is different from older one, and what are the benefit of using this newer stack in turn out to be when you are using in your company. So the
Spot on.
pro tip is keep learning, keep practicing, and keep sharing what you are learning, because if you share your learning experience with others, so it helps people and also help you. What are you learning? It is a good one or is absolute technology nobody ever care about it. So it's being update, keep up to date, and keep sharing the content that you are working on. And I really enjoyed the whole conversation, every single minute of it with Steve Buchanan. It's my pleasure and honor to talk with you on GitOps things. I'm dreaming about this in this year, how we connect with you, but you showed up, shared time with me, and it's been a wonderful learning experience for me. I learned so many new things from you, and hopefully you listening to us learn so many new things from you. And check out the Steve Buchanan blogs. Check him on Twitter, check him on Plural site, check him on LinkedIn, and looks what he shares might be help you in your current stack, in your current environment. Thank you, Steve. Hope to join up you again.
Thanks for having me on. Thanks for having me on.
Hey everybody, if you want to keep up what's going on in the cloud native ecosystem, we have a weekly podcast show on YouTube and SoundCloud by the name of Cloud Native Islamabad. You can listen for free every single week. We try to find cloud and cloud native experts, share updates on cloud native best practices, cloud native real world use cases, cloud native deployment patterns, cloud native deployment strategies. Topics include AKS on Azure, EKS on AWS, GKE on GCP, cloud native architectures, cloud native application developments, container containerizing application, DevOps and automation, cloud native certification strategies, cloud native career tips, and more. So if that sounds awesome to you, head over to the SoundCloud and YouTube and subscribe to Cloud Native Islamabad.